What is authorship in 2021? How many actors, both human and non-human, are involved in the act of authorship? And how aware are we of them as authors, of their potential as authors? So the advent of new technology has made these questions, I think, even more pertinent in the 21st century. Right now, we've got complex generative algorithms that are increasingly being inseparable from text production. My project uses a grounded theory, arts-based inquiry process to explore what digital tools can produce through the process of transmediation. It uses digital tools and different types of artistic expression, from spoken word poetry to song, to engage in a dialogue with the actors that we use in everyday literacies, namely these complex generative digital algorithms. I'm going to use both aesthetic and critical criteria to analyze what's been produced. I'll demonstrate how I apply computer algorithms to the text of published poems in order to create a new text, which is significantly different from the original. Because of the variety of processes that have been used to create this text, and the number of individuals, the number of actors and programs involved in this process, it's extremely difficult to attribute authorship to any single person. The new text that's produced after this process appears to defy conventional meaning. It's full of unintentional grammatical errors and unconventional word usage. This sets the stage for the reader to transform the text, for the reader to take authorship of the text, to make it their own through the use of spoken word poetry and music, inscribing their own meaning on it from an infinite number of possibilities. Every act of transformation in this process involves reading the text and making meaning from it, whether it is through spoken word or through song, and then conveying that meaning through a variety of tools and modes. Now, I'm going to walk you through the process that I used during this project. I used a variety of data and tools in this project, starting out collecting my data from a website called Poetry and Voice. I ran that data through a variety of complex generative algorithms, Singling and Language Workbench. I then worked to create more meaning out of the texts that were generated there by reciting and having some students recite those texts, and then finally combining the voice and the song to create new meaning in GarageBand. So where did I get my data? Poetry and Voice. Poetry and Voice is a Canada-wide poetry recitation competition for high school students, where students choose from a database of thousands of published poems and interpret and recite those poems, and they are judged on their performance. I chose this partly because of my own background as a high school teacher and my passion for English and drama. Poetry and Voice combines a lot of these. I've participated in the Poetry and Voice competition as a judge before, and also as a coach for students at my school. Mostly, though, I chose this because it's an absolutely fantastic example of Bard's reader response in action. Students are creating their own meaning from the text. The best performances take poems and generate entirely new understandings of those poems based on the student reader's choices. To create my final product, I wanted to recombine those poems in a way that generated new alternative meanings, according to the methods of procedural poetics. I chose 2 poems at a time, focusing on poems with thematic connection, but also some element of contrast. I'm going to show you 2 examples. The first of those is The New Experience by Suzanne Buffem and What Horror to Awake at Night by Lorene Niederker. So these are 2 poems that to me share an element of dissatisfaction, of disillusionment. For Niederker, she's writing about being trapped in the gender roles of the mid-20th century. She's trapped in a life that now terrifies her, that revolts her. Suddenly awake in this metaphorical darkness, she sees the light of a realization, the realization that she spent her life on nothing. Her existence of lifting household stuffing, carpets, dishes, benches, fishes, is ultimately meaningless. She compares herself to a mosquito buzzing around before burning out. Buffem's poem shows a similar disillusionment, though the context is different. She's writing in the digital age of the 21st century. Feels like everything's already been experienced, from flights to Rome to Greece to the last living snow leopard. It's all been broadcast by somebody else through the otherworldly glow of TV, of mass media, social media. When something is done for the sake of experience alone, she says, something is done just to show it off, to say that you've done it because other people have done it. It's worthless. It doesn't mean anything. Life for the speaker is wasted if that is how you are living it. The context of these poems is really different, though, due to their time period, and their form differs. Buffum is writing in unrhymed stanzas of 2 lines, using enjambment to cut off phrases at the end of a stanza or a line and then continue them on the next, creating that sense of suspense and tension in the poem. Niedecker is using rhyming couplets and quatrains, a little bit more conventional. The first tool that I used was the GTR Language Workbench. This is an online tool that allows the user to create an algorithm which will transform language. I'm going to walk you through one of the algorithms I created and applied to my data. First, I pasted in the text of the 2 poems that I had chosen. Then, I selected the reorder function. This broke up the text of the original poems, creating new combinations and meanings. It ensures that there are hundreds of possibilities for the order of lines in the new poem. Every additional command now adds more chance and more variance to the text. Each time I apply the same commands to the same poem, it yields a different result. Then I choose S7 replace. This randomly chooses a word that starts with the same letters, and I applied this to singular and mass nouns. Then I used antonym replace. This I applied to singular and mass nouns. Again, those have already been replaced, so I'm doubly transforming the words. The next tool that I used was Singling. Singling is a computer program that transforms text into musical notes. You can use a variety of instruments and controls to create songs from text. First, I had to choose an instrument. This involves a reading of the text and picking an instrument that would match my reading of the text. To me, this text felt synthetic. It felt cut up, and I wanted an instrument that would reflect that. I chose note duration, rest duration that are standard in music, 0.125. Since many nouns and verbs are transformed, I really wanted to make them pop when I sonified them. So I did this by increasing the volume on the nouns and extending the length of the notes on the verbs. This mirrors the way that someone could read and perform a text orally by saying a particular word louder or longer. I also changed the instrument on them, again using instruments with a synthetic sound. This was about contrasting with the bass sound, but again drawing attention to the transformed nouns and verbs, drawing attention to their artificial, synthetic nature. A final step of my process was creating glitched JPEG images with the text edit function on my map. To do this, I downloaded an image and opened it with text edit. Then I pasted lines of a poem into that image. This created this glitch style image and really just spoke to the cut up nature of my work. This was also further use of the computer as an artist, using the computer algorithms that we use in our everyday activities, like the ones that read JPEG code, to create art. This is the text that the Language Workbench algorithm that I created came up with. Adding to the element of chance here is the fact that I have little understanding of the technical inner workings of the computer programs that are being used to transform this text, of how this process is actually happening. I can enter commands, but the algorithm that is being produced by Language Workbench can't recognize how the words were used, whether they were used as nouns or verbs. And essentially what happens is that the algorithm replaces anything that could be used as a noun in any context. What this does is it reveals the limits of the machine. However, it's opening up more possibilities for new meaning by transforming things that I didn't intend. Who's the author here? Me the Language Workbench program, the poets whose texts I'm using? Can there be any original intended meaning? I don't think there can be. The author here is unknowable, governed totally by the rules of a process, but the new meanings that are generated are totally limitless. So much of the text doesn't make literal sense. It opens itself up to the interpretation by the reader. It can mean exactly what the reader wants it to mean. Now I'd like you to pause and just read over the text of this poem. How do you interpret it? Next, I'll show the final product of this project. A recitation of the poems created in Language Workbench, layered over songs created from those same poems in Singling. Here's one with the reading that I did myself. They let out small-minded puffs of smokelessness and explicate. Through the windows of houses, I say lives lithographed up. All the old womanish ones haggle burped out. The sun parlor camouflaged out. It washed the old womanish sun parlor. I washed real for a newborn experimenter. I've spewed my life offices on noticing. Carpets, dishes for the salad of experimenter alphabetically. I'm pilot management and pagan, paler and puke, the thoughtlessness that stints. How argue you, noticing, and in the dime seating the lightheadedness? I hearken wind-blown stripes in the woods, package sorting in the dirty, experimenter tax reducing me. I bite into an applicability that tattled swiftly of time fuse. Mosquitoes biovac, they layered in livable askance heaps along the Rome, and these westernized smolder livable bites topically. Lighted housemen stumble, benches, fishes. From a distastefulness, some append to beaching smuggle when I appropriate with my hatchet in my hands. And blinded in drifts across the fairgrounds and fields, I watered waves lapping the crunched coastline. Isn't this all I lease? What horse pond to a wash at night, porter? I flicked to Rome. I flicked to Greece. I've spewed my life offices on noticing. I've spewed my life offices in noticing. That noticing worthwhile doled isn't worthwhile doled with the out-of-court glowing of tweak. Time isn't white-walled, I say to the late lizard snowballing leprechauns sized around with somnambulisms wiggling. Buzzing and burnishing, I sate on a rock garden in the shadow of the Acropolis. While on stage, a fiber end billion years legalized to shine, and conking dust sheets column in the clouds. This project has shown that we need to examine everyday actors in literacy, that these algorithms that we depend on have tremendous artistic potential. This is something that educators can use. This is something that can produce art and poetry that can be examined from a critical lens as well as from an aesthetic lens. I believe this project has also shown that these algorithms that we depend on act like any other author. They only generate text, as Barthes said about the author. It's the reader that gives it meaning. Finally, each transmediation, each transformation of a text into a different form gives it new meaning. And the combinations of them reveal so much more.